सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम, सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम। पिछली साख भरूं संतन की, पिछली साख भरूं संतन की, अड़े सवारे काम। सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम, सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम। जब लगी गज बल अपनों बरतों, जब लगी गज बल अपनों बरतों, नेक सरयो नहीं काम, नेक सरयो नहीं काम। निर्बल हो बल राम पुकारो, निर्बल हो बलराम पुकारो। आए आधे नाम, सुनी रे मैंने निर्बल के बलराम। द्रुपद सुता निर्बल भयता दिन, तज आयो निज धाम, तज आयो निज धाम। दुशासन की भुजा थकित भये, दुशासन की भुजा थकित भय, वसन रूप भयो श्याम। सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम। अप बल तप बल और बाहुबल, चौथों है बलदान, चौथों है बलदान। सूर किशोर कृपाते सब बल, सूर किशोर कृपाते सब बल, हारे को हरि नाम। सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम, सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम, सुनी री मैंने निर्बल के बलराम।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters, boys and girls. Yesterday we had a pretty extensive session on guided meditation, and yet there were a few things that I forgot to tell you. That always happens at the end of every session, and also, as it has been said, at the end of life. No matter how hard you work, the end tray will never be empty. Okay. So, one of the things that I forgot to tell you was that during Pratyahar, you start hearing all types of sounds, and that happens because of the unmasking effect, because the normal chatter in the mind that normally masks the sounds which are inevitable, like the tick tock of the clock, or somebody moving the furniture, or a vehicle blowing the horn somewhere outside, or the birds chirping. Now all these sounds are always there, and yet we don't hear them because we are distracted by all the rest of the chatter that is going on in the mind. When that has been suspended, you start hearing all these sounds. One way, of course, is to ignore these sounds, pay no attention to these sounds, ignore them completely, don't try to think of what they mean and what their significance is. Another very effective way of masking these sounds, the inevitable sounds, is by having some sweet, soothing music in the background. And you might have seen that we always start these sessions well before time and with the mother's music, which is very soothing, very meditative music. And there's a large variety of samples of the mother's music available. And all these are available for free download for personal use from the website of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. So if you feel like getting any of these musics, you can get that and play that in the background while you are meditating. So while all these stray sounds will not be masked by the chatter in the mind, they'll get masked by the sweet, soothing music which serves as the background. Another thing that I wanted to tell you was that on the YouTube channel of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch, you'll find 4 samples of guided meditation in the very powerful voice of Tara Didi. They include some instructions about going into meditation, followed by the recitation of a passage by the mother. And if you want a very short meditation sometimes, then some of the most valuable and effective passages to meditate upon are available again in Tara Didi's powerful voice on the YouTube channel of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. There are 366 of them, each corresponding to one page of the compilation of the mother's works called The Great Adventure. So you'll find them in the playlist The Great Adventure, and since that book has 366 pages, one page for each day of the year, you'll get 366 readings, and each of these is 2 to 3 minutes, a 2 to 3 minute video. So when you are in the stage of dhyana after dharana, that could be a very soothing 3-minute meditation. While you are listening to those passages, meditate upon them and then follow it up with further reflection and meditation for a few minutes, and that could be a very easy way of meditating for a short period of time in a very effective way. You might say that we take quite a long time to go into dhyana, and therefore how can we play that? You know, the process when described looks long, but when you get experienced, then after settling down in the posture with your eyes closed, letting a wave of relaxation pass through your body, starting breathing slowly, and then emptying your mind of any unwanted thoughts will take less than a minute, because the process can be very quick, although describing it takes long. So you can start with that short meditative passage, quickly go into that within a few seconds, even that will become possible, and then you start meditating on the passage. Today we were supposed to have a guest speaker, Amita Mehra, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, she has not been able to join us today, although she will after a few days, and therefore you have to tolerate me once more, yet one more day. Today's session is on physical culture, and culture here is more in the sense of being cultured, something that makes us cultured. Cultured, the way we use the expressions like a cultured voice. So in the same way, not only the voice, but a lot in life can be cultured rather than crude. So cultured as opposed to crude. That is what essentially physical culture is about, and we shall see a little more about what it means through the presentation that will just follow. Seeing the pictures of the mother and Sri Aurobindo reminded me that I didn't tell you anything about the gist of the devotional song that you just heard. That song was about, saying that the weak, the powerless, have the divine available to them. The all-powerful divine, the divine that is the source of all power on earth. So nobody needs to feel weak or powerless. As the Bible has also said, it is the meek who inherit the kingdom of God. So, and to sort of make that point very effectively, the poet says that whenever I need you, whenever I feel powerless and want that infinite source of power to be added to my own feeble efforts, I just have to call you, and after I have just called half your name, you are there. So sort of if you are, before you have said Shri Ma, the moment you say Shri, they are there. Shri applies to both Shri Ma and Sri Aurobindo. So the moment you say Shri, they are there. So, just half the name, or instead of Jesus Christ, whether you say Jesus or Christ, either of these, and the divine is there. So that's how the poet makes that point very effectively. So the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. The YES program is a part of the 150th anniversary celebrations of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. And today our topic is physical culture in yoga. Because physical culture is a term that is used even otherwise, not just in yoga. And what physical culture generally means is training for strength and health of the body. And that is a rather narrow meaning of physical culture. In yoga, we broaden it further. One way to look at it would be that yoga includes both physical discipline and mental discipline. It is the physical discipline that is physical culture. In the words of the mother, physical culture is the sadhana of the body. The more consciously you do it, the quicker and more general the result. More general means that all parts of the being get affected. Then she goes on to say, physical culture, which aims at building a body capable of serving as a fit instrument for the higher consciousness, demands very austere habits, a great regularity in sleep, food, physical exercise, and in all activities. So in yoga, physical culture is not just about physical activity or exercise, which one assumes will improve the strength and make us more fit, strength of the muscles, and make the person more fit as it is commonly used. But in yoga, it includes all these physical measures or aspects of physical discipline which make the instrument more fit for implementing the divine will or for translating into action, translating into our everyday life, the higher consciousness. Whatever makes the body capable of serving as a fit instrument for the higher consciousness and belongs to the physical realm, like sleep, food, and physical exercise, all this is a part of physical culture in yoga. So one can say briefly that physical culture makes the body cultured rather than crude. Movements can also be, like the voice or entertainment. It can be either cultured or crude. So there are three main aspects of physical culture in yoga: physical activity, eating, and sleeping. So we'll take them up one by one briefly. In relation to all these three things are important. Why is it important? Why physical activity? Why eating? Why sleeping? What it is and how. So the why, what, and how. And in yoga, the why and how are more important than the what. So let's start with physical activity. Why physical activity? We, of course, undertake physical activity to get healthy and strong, but why do we want to be healthy? It may look like a ridiculous question. Everybody wants to be healthy. We don't need a reason for it. But in yoga, there is a reason. We want to be healthy so that the instrument, that is the body-mind complex, becomes fit for the work for which we are here, the work that will help us fulfill the purpose of life. The body, which is a temple of the divine, should become worthy of the inhabitant. The soul, the spark of the divine, which we all have, just as you want an idol to be placed in a clean temple, in the same way, you want the soul also to have a temple that is worthy of it, and that to that physical activity can make an important contribution. Dr. Alok Pandey, in this beautiful inspired book Veda of the Body, says physical activity is necessary to make the body more sensitive, more receptive, more supple and plastic and strong enough to receive, bear and transmit the psychic influence in our lives. In all yogic techniques, we are trying to influence the less evolved part of the being through a higher evolved part of the being. We are trying to influence the body with the mind and the mind with the psychic being. So we are trying to bring the influence of the higher part of more highly evolved part of the being on the one which is less evolved. Now, if this influence to which the lower or less evolved part of the being is not accustomed is suddenly made available, it may not be ready for it, and that can make that higher influence either ineffective or lead to an aberration which may be seen as abnormal. And therefore the body also has to be prepared to be able to receive that psychic influence. It's something like if we go out of the dark into a well-lit place, it's nice to have a place which is only moderately well-lit or dim-lit rather than be exposed suddenly to sunlight. If you are exposed to the sunlight, the eyes will be dazzled. So a body which is not yet fully accustomed to the full play of the prana and the prana not fully equipped to handle the influence of the psychic being, all this will become easier if the basic material frame, that is the body itself, has become more receptive to a higher influence, because eventually we are trying to transmit the psychic influence. The prana is acting as a bridge, the mind is acting as a bridge, but all these are acting as a bridge to carry that influence of a more highly evolved part of the being on the body. So to make the body receptive to it, ready for it, plastic here means in terms of being not rigid, not something which which is not ready for a change, which has a lot of inertia. So overcoming that inertia and becoming amenable to change is being plastic here. So to make the body more sensitive, more receptive, more supple and plastic and strong enough to receive, bear and transmit. All these are very carefully chosen words. To receive that influence, to be able to bear it and to be able to transmit it to the less evolved part of the being which we are working on. So all that becomes possible through physical activity. Now, what type of physical activity? Theoretically, any type of physical activity, because the important thing is the attitude with which it is done, which we'll come to when we see how the physical activity should be done. But certainly, having said that, any physical activity is acceptable if done with the proper attitude. Asanas are the best. The yogic postures are the best, and that we saw in considerable detail a few days ago, because of the top-to-toe workout that they provide, the scientific way in which they have been designed, the sequence in which we do them, so that at the end of the session, we are relaxed rather than exhausted. And all the practical convenience of being able to do them at home and not spending time on commuting and changing the dress and so on and so forth. So all those points why asanas are the best. And in spite of being not very exhausting, in fact, they are very relaxing. We are not exhausted at the end of the session. In spite of that, the improvement in cardiorespiratory fitness is comparable to what happens in far more intense exercises of the ordinary variety. So therefore yogasanas are the best. But then a combination of asanas and another activity might even be better. For example, a morning walk or an evening walk along with asanas might be better than just the asanas. And of course the walk can also become a meditative practice. So a meditative walk and asanas might be a better combination. Sometimes it is asked that if we want to walk and also do the asanas at the same time, say in the morning. Very few people would have that much time available in the morning, but if you do have time, then what should we do first and what next? It's preferable to walk first and then do the asanas. The reason being, then the walk will serve as a warm-up. So use the walk as a warm-up, and then you can skip the warm-up and start the asana straight away. And after those intense stretches, you will not feel like going for a walk. You end with shavasana, and then again to continue after that relaxation with a walk will not be a very natural thing to do. So a more natural combination will be, if you want to do them one after another, first the walk, then asanas, and then pranayamas, and then a relaxation in shavasana. Now, how should the physical activity be? Conscious, being fully aware of what is happening in the body all the time. Then cultured, slow, gentle, graceful, rhythmic and harmonious movements. Rhythmic reminds me that physical activity could also be a dance. And dancing can be a very profound meditative experience along with being rather intense exercise. And coupled with a prayer. Why coupled with a prayer? Because that serves as a reminder of the spiritual significance of the physical activity. So in other words, just as we have mindfulness relate to the mind, one can also talk in terms of physical mindness. So we should not only be mindful of what the mind is full of, but also be mindful of what the body is doing. And that is what essentially conscious physical activity is about, being mindful of what the body is doing. Whether it is a part of structured exercise like the yogic postures or a morning walk, or whether it is ordinary everyday activity like walking to work or chopping fruits and vegetables in the kitchen or whatever it is. So all types of activity throughout the day should be mindful. That not only makes it a part of the physical culture in yoga, it also reduces the possibility of accidents. Because if we are mindful of what the body is doing, while chopping fruits and vegetables, the knife will not cut the finger, and while walking on the road, we will not stumble on a stone and fall. And that's why the mother says walking to go somewhere and walking as an exercise is not the same thing. Because walking to go somewhere, one can do without being conscious of it. If one does it while being conscious of it, then it becomes a part of physical culture. But then when one is walking as an exercise, one is more likely to be conscious of what one is doing and why one is doing it. Now we come to the second aspect of physical culture, and that is eating the food that we eat. Why do we eat? Again, corresponding to what we saw in the physical culture, here to provide the material necessary for making the instrument fit for the work for which we are here in the world, and to make the temple, the bodily temple, worthy of the inhabitant, the divine. What should we eat? This can have two aspects here in relation to eating. What foods we eat and how much we eat. Now, what foods we eat, what is good for health, and how much we eat for need, not for greed. We'll come to this in much greater detail in the next course, Yes.02. But briefly, if we consider both modern science and ancient wisdom, what is good for health is a diet which is vegetarian, at least predominantly vegetarian, if not entirely so, and in which the staple is a combination of cereals and pulses. And these food grains, that is cereals and pulses, should be unrefined, as far as possible whole. That is, as nature provides us to them, we should not have removed the outer seed coat or the covering, or it's, say in case of wheat, the wheat bran. So that is what is removed sometimes to get refined flour. So unrefined with the outer seed coat intact. So these food grains should be whole as far as possible. That should form the staple, and it should be a combination of a cereal like wheat, rice, barley, etc., or oats. Now these are all cereals. And a pulse or a legume, or what in India we call dals, like say Bengal gram, moong dal, or beans. Now these are all legumes. So a combination of these should be the staple diet, and the diet should be predominantly vegetarian, if not exclusively so. Along with that, we should have a fairly liberal supply of fruits and vegetables. We can club the two because from the nutritional point of view, fruits and vegetables are equivalent, more or less the same. And how much of these? Preferably at least 4 helpings a day. For about 4 helpings of fruits and vegetables. And how about oils? A judicious combination of oils, or if we have to use only one oil as a cooking medium, the best that is considered these days, the best are soybean oil and mustard oil. These are the two best, because these are the only 2 vegetable oils that provide us the N3 type of fatty acids, the omega-3. And if we want to further diversify, then it is good to have a moderate supply of butter or ghee. That also is desirable and will be good for the diet, in the diet. So that is about the fats. And then spices in moderation, because spices are not just for taste and fragrance, they are a very concentrated supply of what are called these days antioxidants, or the nutrients which have a wide variety of functions. Sometimes we club them under phytochemicals because all these protective chemicals are present in plants. Phyto means plants. So we should take that also. So essentially, I mean, sort of a healthy, balanced diet is predominantly, if not exclusively, vegetarian. The staple food is a combination of cereals and pulses. These food grains should be whole as far as possible, and we should have at least 4 helpings of fruits and vegetables, and a judiciously chosen fat, and or a judiciously chosen combination of fats, and spices in moderation. And this type of a diet should be taken in just the right amount, neither too much nor too little. And how much is enough? As a rule of the thumb, the advice that we have in Ayurveda is very useful to keep in mind, that at the end of the meal, about half the stomach should be full of food, 1/4 of water, and the remaining 1/4 should be empty. Which means that, sort of to go into the spirit behind these words, what it means is that don't go on eating till you can't eat anymore. When you still have the capacity to eat some, but you feel that you have eaten enough, it's time to stop eating. So eat for need, not for greed. How should one eat? Again, as in case of physical activity, conscious eating, cultured, which means slow and gentle, not trying to pounce on the food, take too much of big mouthfuls and so on at a time, and coupled with a prayer, which will again serve as a reminder of why actually we are eating. So what type of a prayer? The way we pray is not important. The important thing is to pray. But these are some of the components which one can introduce, especially in a mealtime prayer. While starting the food, gratitude. Gratitude not only for having the food, but also food available. Although that is important because many in the world go hungry even today. So gratitude for the food that we have, gratitude also for the capacity to eat and digest the food. Many people who have food available, but because of an illness they can't. They are being fed through tubes for months and years continuously. They keep eating through tubes. So the capacity to eat and the capacity to digest and utilize the food, all this calls for gratitude. Then we can again remind ourselves that we are eating for need, not for greed, eating for health, not for taste, and the primary purpose is to maintain the bodily instrument so that it is fit to implement the divine will. We should also finish with a prayer, and gratitude is a prayer that is suitable for all occasions, all times, and it can in itself be not only the best prayer but also a complete prayer. As Sri Aurobindo has said, sorry, the picture at the top, I can't read a few words at the top, but about food, what Sri Aurobindo has said is, see, do not trouble your mind about food, which means that don't be preoccupied with food. See, I have a wonderful right hand by my right hand side, whom you can't see. She made the whole sentence available to me in another device. Do not trouble your mind about food, meaning don't get preoccupied with food. Take it in the right quantity, neither too much nor too little, without greed or repulsion. No matter how the food tastes, if it is good for health, take it without repulsion. Greed is, of course, something to be avoided. But then we sometimes forget that even repulsion should be avoided because we may not like something in terms of taste. But if it is healthy for us, just take it gratefully, and one finds that repulsion will not be there because taste is something rather subjective. When Gandhiji went to England as a young boy to study law, he was a vegetarian, and he had given a promise before leaving India that he will continue to be a vegetarian in England. Now, those days in England, to find vegetarian food was rather difficult, and he didn't know much of cooking. So what he started doing was eating just about any vegetable and boiling it and eating it. And then he writes in his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, that he could eat without any repulsion even boiled spinach. And then he came to the conclusion, which again he writes in that book, that the true sight of taste is not the tongue but the mind. Sri Aurobindo, when he had just moved to Pondicherry, again there were only 4 or 5 boys, they didn't have much money, there was no means of cooking any elaborate food, but those young boys who had gone with Sri Aurobindo, who were with him in the freedom struggle and now were with him in Pondicherry, they used to cook and then go to play in the evening. He didn't join them, he was not very fond of games and sports. Sri Aurobindo was more of a scholar, so he would find all the time that he had would spend that on reading and writing rather than going out to play in the evening. So they cooked and left because Sri Aurobindo wanted to have an early dinner. They came and ate after coming back from the playground. So they cooked and went, and in their absence Sri Aurobindo would have his meals and be ready to sleep, and sometimes would go to sleep by the time they came back. So one day it so happened that when they came back and started having their dinner, they realized that the only vegetable that they had cooked had no salt in it. It was without any salt. So they thought that today Sri Aurobindo must have been quite annoyed while having this food. So the next day they asked him, how was the food yesterday? He said, it was okay, it was fine. So then he said, but we had forgotten to add salt to the vegetable. And Sri Aurobindo's answer was remarkable. What he said was, just as salt has a taste, saltlessness also has a taste. So that is without greed or repulsion. As the means given to you by the mother for the maintenance of the body. So that is how the food has to be looked at, not as a means of sensory indulgence, but as something that has been given to us by the mother. That expresses gratitude for the maintenance of the body. In the right spirit, offering to the divine in you. So the food has to be offered to the divine, because the food itself is the divine. That's also a manifestation of the divine. It was, when it was a plant, not only a manifestation of the divine, a living manifestation of the divine. And we are also a manifestation of the divine, and our digestive mechanisms are also a manifestation of the divine. So it's offering to the divine for a divine use. And that is what is expressed, very well in brief in that shloka in the Gita, Brahmarpanam Brahmahave Brahmagnau Brahmana Ahutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. So all is Brahma. The food is Brahma, we are Brahma, and the Brahma is being offered as an ahuti, as an offering. Ahuti, because essentially the process of digestion and utilization of food is similar to burning something. The way you burn in the fire, in sacrificial fire or any type of fire in a yajna or havan. So it's an ahuti that is being offered. So that food is an ahuti being offered to the divine, and for Brahma Karma Samadhina, so that the divine purpose can be fulfilled. So that is the spirit in which the food has to be eaten, with gratitude, offering it to the divine in you, and then it will not create tamas, which means it will not create laziness, inertia, because the food can have those characteristics, but more than the food, it is the attitude with which it is eaten which can create either tamas or sattva or rajas. It is much better to eat the meal in silence, or at any rate in quietness. Perfect silence may not be always possible, but one can be quiet. Again, there's no rigidity in integral yoga. It's not that you can't speak a word, but at least you should peace and quiet. Without that, mindful eating is not possible. One can eat mindfully and consciously only if the mind is at peace. Now we come to the third aspect of physical culture, and that is sleeping. Again, why do we sleep? For the corresponding reasons, to provide the rest necessary for making the instrument fit for the work and the temple worthy of the inhabitant. Why rest? Because we are so constituted that periodic rest is a necessity. Something like, recharging the batteries. Now, what in relation to sleep translates into how long to sleep and when to sleep? How long to sleep, as a rule of the thumb, something between 6 and 8 hours. But how much exactly? 6, 7 or 8? That varies a lot from one individual to another, because sleep requirement is different. And the only logical way to find out how much an individual needs is a rather roundabout way. The roundabout in the sense that if you sleep a certain length of time every day, and you find that you are energetic throughout the day, it means that you are sleeping just the right amount. If one has any symptoms of inadequate sleep, then the person should start sleeping a little longer. And what are those symptoms of inadequate sleep? Obviously, one of the first symptoms would be feeling sleepy during the daytime. But apart from that, apart from feeling sleepy during the daytime, a person who has not slept enough finds it difficult to concentrate, especially on mental work. He may become irritable, getting annoyed quickly, losing his temper quickly, and the person may also feel more hungry. The blood pressure might go up. Now, these are some of the symptoms of inadequate sleep for a day or two. And if this continues for months and years, which is happening these days, then the person's immunity levels go down, which means the person starts falling ill more often. So these are some of the symptoms of inadequate sleep. And it's surprising that something that almost everybody enjoys and is available totally free is being had in inadequate amounts these days. In fact, as it is called technically, voluntary sleep deprivation is emerging as a major contributor to lifestyle diseases. So how long? And when to sleep? It's not that if one has to sleep for 7 hours, then sleeping from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. is the same as sleeping from 9 a.m. to 4 a.m., 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. From 9 to 4 is much better than sleeping from 1 to 8, although both are 7 hours. So one should go to bed early. So that ancient wisdom, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, still holds, because the world has changed, but our body has not changed much. We still have an ancient body living in the modern world. Now, how should one eat? Again, the same things. Consciously. Sorry, this is a mishap. This should have been changed to sleeping. Copy and paste. Disaster. So how should one sleep? Conscious, cultured, and coupled with a prayer. How to sleep? Again, how to sleep, the attitude to sleep can be reinforced by a bedtime prayer and an early morning prayer at the time of waking up. And some of the items which could be a part of the bedtime prayer is gratitude. Gratitude for everything that we have and for everything that we don't have. Everything that we asked for and got, everything that we wanted but did not get because we did not need it, because the divine knows better than we do what is good for us. Gratitude for everything pleasant happening in our life and for everything unpleasant happening in our life, because both are opportunities for spiritual growth and they are there because both are necessary. So gratitude for just about everything. Then one can review the day, how the day went, what is it throughout the day that I can be proud of and therefore grateful for, that I had the wisdom and the courage to do what I should have done, and what is it that I did during the day which I can be ashamed of, or I should be ashamed of, both. So review the day and remind oneself that I'm sleeping so that my batteries get recharged and I'm ready for doing what this instrument is supposed to do the next day. And then, in a spirit of total surrender, just rest your head not on the pillow, but imagining the pillow to be the lap of the divine. And what can be a suitable thing to think of on getting up? Again, gratitude for having yet another day available for fulfilling the purpose of life, and some of the essential elements of a prayer which can be suitable for morning are embodied in the glass prayer. What is this glass prayer? G for gratitude. Gratitude for everything, love to all, and renewing one's aspiration. And what can be the best aspiration? As the mother has said, in one of her prayers, in prayers and meditations, let my one aspiration be to know thee and serve thee better every day. And another beautiful aspiration, let me do in the best way I can the best thing to do. And that links with sincerity. Sincerity to actually do the best thing to do in the best way I can. And surrender to the divine, surrender of the personal will to the divine will. So gratitude, love to all, aspiration to know thee and serve thee better, the sincerity to do in the best way I can the best thing to do, and surrender to the divine. Suggested reading in this book, Back to Health Through Yoga. The 3rd chapter is on eating. The 5th chapter on exercise, staying mobile. This is on physical activity. And the 6th chapter is on sleep, sweet dreams. And this beautiful book, Veda of the Body by Dr. Alok Pandey, and Physical Culture you find in on these pages. And this compilation from the mother's works, Health and Healing in Yoga. Here, physical culture forms the subject. Sort of, it's there at many places, but this is where it is concentrated. Pages 211 through page 235. And another compilation on education, but it has a lot on physical culture. Sri Aurobindo and the Mother on education. It's just about, this book is just about 150 pages, but it's a gold mine. It's a very beautifully selected pieces, and not pieces, in fact, long essays, beautifully selected essays on education by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And the last few chapters, last 2-3 chapters are on the 4 austerities, which the Mother has talked about. And it is while talking about those 4 austerities, in the austerity of the body, she talks about physical culture. And this is a beautiful summary of physical culture. Again, pages 135 through 140 in this compilation, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother on education. So that brings us to the end of this presentation.
Namaste, sir. Sonika this side.
Namaste, Sonika.
Sir, I have a question regarding sleep. So, how about having a total sleep duration of about like six to 6.5 hours in a day, but have it split in the sense that like during the night you take 5 to 5.5 hours of sleep, and then during the day you take a nap of say around 45 minutes or something.
Yes, that's a good point. One can split it, but by and large, physiologically, this type of biphasic sleep is more characteristic of old age rather than in young people. And Ayurvedic wisdom also does not really encourage too much sleeping in the daytime, uh, except in old age. But having said that, even if one does not sleep, uh, it's good to lie down at least for 15-20 minutes, sometime in the middle of the day, maybe 15 minutes or half an hour after lunch. That's the best time to lie down for at least 15 minutes, if not longer. One may not fall asleep, but lying down. Why that is important is from the point of view of the health of the back, to maintain back health. Why? Because you see that effectively splits the period during which you are erect into 3 phases rather than 2. Suppose we take say 8 hours of sleep, then 16 hours the person is erect. If you break it in the middle of the day, then it becomes 8 plus 8 plus 8. So your 16 hours of waking period is broken into 2, and that makes a lot of difference. Because when we are erect, the intervertebral discs, that is the little structure between 2 adjacent vertebrae, and we have so many of these vertebrae, so all these discs, they are gradually getting compressed. And therefore, it's adding to the strain on the back. In fact, they get compressed so much that if one takes the height early in the morning and late in the evening, there could be a difference of easily at least half an inch. They're getting compressed throughout the day. So lying down decompresses those discs, gives them a chance to once again relax, and that can contribute in a significant way to staying free from back pain. So, and back pain is not a problem of old age. Back pain can occur also in young people. In fact, occurs in younger people more often than in people above 60. That's an interesting thing. Why it is so, we need not go into right now, but that does happen.
Thank you, sir.
Maybe I can tell why it happens less often in people above 60s. Firstly, I mean, they have experience. So they know how much weight to carry and how to carry it, and how much they can tolerate, how much they can't, and generally they also have time to lie down in the afternoon. So these are some of the reasons why it's less common. And also, when they find that something is heavy and they should not be doing it, not only they avoid doing it, if help is available, they are ready to accept it. In young age, you have that ego. I can do it myself. I will not let anybody help me. So that ego is gone in people above 60. So that's why actually it's a problem of young people more than old people. 40, 45, 50 is the age when maximum back pain occurs by and large. Because by then the person is aged enough and yet thinks that he's quite young. So that is the time when one gets back pain. And therefore, this is something which applies to everybody, young or old. Try and straighten the back on the bed, be in a horizontal position for at least 15-20 minutes, midday, preferably after lunch. So that's why I said it was a good question. So sleep or no sleep, lying down is good. Sleep may not be necessary except in old age.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
There is one statement you mentioned, ancient body living in the modern world. So, how can the physical body be the space or the instrument to bridge the ancient and the modern? If you can talk about that.
Well, when I said the ancient body in the modern world, what I meant was the body has actually not changed, not only the human body, but even the animal body. In terms of the body, the human body is no more perfect than the body of, say, a horse or a lion or a monkey. Physical perfection, to the extent it was possible uh, in the in the present stage of evolution, had been reached much before human beings evolved. In some respects, human beings do better. In some respects, animals do better. When it comes to temperature regulation, for example, human beings do better than most other animals. But there are many things which human beings can't do as well as animals can. A human being can't live on grass the way a cow can. A human being can't run as fast as a horse. A human being is not as strong as a lion. So there are many things which animals can actually do better. So, but when it comes to, say, the liver or the lungs or the stomach, the human stomach or the human liver is just as good or bad as the liver or lungs or the stomach of a lion or an elephant or a tiger or a monkey. There's not much difference. So it means that bodily we are in fact even more ancient than the evolution of the human species itself. And that is what I meant by an ancient body. And further evolution, again, as Sri Aurobindo has told us, and seems quite obvious, is not going to be in terms of the body. The further evolution will be at the level of consciousness, taking us to a level of consciousness beyond the mental consciousness. The body will remain more or less the same. But then you might say, Sri Aurobindo has talked about transformation of the body. The transformation of the body will not be because these physico-chemical mechanisms of the body will evolve further. That will be because they will become more amenable to that higher influence from the psychic. That is why the body will become more capable. And may reach a stage, of course, as Sri Aurobindo and the mother have said, when death and degeneration are no longer a necessity. The body loses its characteristics of degeneration and decay, and death will no longer be a necessity. So, but that is a different aspect. That is because you because the body may become capable of receiving and transmitting to every cell the higher psychic influence. So that is what will transform the body. But in terms of physico-chemical mechanisms, not much change is perhaps necessary and not much change is likely to take place. So that is what I meant when I said an ancient body in the modern world. So I mean, coming to your question, if the bridge would be to let a higher influence flow into the body, which means that all our life, including the physical aspects of life like exercise, eating and sleeping, should be done with the yogic attitude. That is what will help us build a sort of a bridge between the ancient and the modern.
Okay, the next is you were speaking about sleeping. So, can you speak about yoga of sleep and dreams? What Mother and Sri Aurobindo have spoken on?
Well, some of the things which may apply to uh, rishis and avatars at that level may not apply to us. For example, the mother could manage with almost no sleep. She hardly, some very little sleep she could manage on. Sri Aurobindo again had very little sleep when he was writing those letters to disciples who had asked questions. Uh, he was sometimes sleeping very little. So, using the yogic processes, it is possible to cut down on the necessity for sleep, reducing it to a bare minimum, just as the person can also cut down on the need for food. There are yogis who can do with hardly any food or no food at all for very long periods of time. They can do without much of air for long periods of time. I mean, those are things which are possible, but not for the average person. The average person is not interested in it, and it's not possible without much taking the yoga to a much higher level. So those things are possible, but all the same they have said many valuable things which may be useful also to us, and that is of course about conscious sleeping, as we were talking about. And one thing which the mother has talked about is breaking the sleep into slices. And interesting, those slices correspond to physiologically, the switch over from the slow wave sleep to the fast wave or REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep or dream sleep. This fast wave sleep, REM sleep, and dream sleep are synonymous, which means that the slow wave sleep is a dreamless sleep. So initially when we sleep, the first 3 to 4 hours are dreamless sleep. And then we get a dream, which we generally don't remember. But then after that, we again go into a dreamless sleep, and this keeps alternating. And as we start approaching the early morning when we get up, these cycles become more quick, their frequency goes up, which means that the first time that we dream, maybe after 3 to 4 hours of dreamless sleep. The second time we dream, maybe only after 1.5 hours of dreamless sleep. And the third time or fourth time, it may be just after 15 minutes of dreamless sleep and another dream. So that frequency of dreams keeps increasing. So these cycles become faster as we go. Now each of these transitions, sometimes when we wake up is during these transitions. So those are the slices that into which we can break the sleep. And what is the use of being conscious of it? Being conscious of this type of shift gives us yet one more opportunity to renew our aspiration. So that is the use one can make of these shifts.
Okay, the next question is a question on education. There is an overemphasis on test and marks, which has a bad effect on the self-esteem of those children who aren't doing well in tests but who may be creative and good kids otherwise. What do Sri Aurobindo or the mother say about this?
What Sri Aurobindo and the mother have said about this is firstly that each child's individuality should be respected, mostly. So every child can't be good at academics, but every child has something important and precious and valuable which can be appreciated. And that is one of the basic things. But then for that, we should be able to see in each child the divine, the manifestation of the divine. If we are able to see that, then one will not judge a child on these criteria. So being non-judgmental, respecting the child for being a soul, at least every child is a soul, and trying as far as possible to mold our lessons in such a way that they are student-centered, individual-centered, which means that even in the early years, till the age of 14, the mother has said that every child should learn just about everything, because to some extent knowing everything is important for every child. But at the same time, even during those first 14 years, the individuality of the child has to be respected, and the limitations of the child also understood. The child should be encouraged to spend more time on the things for which the child is actually made, and not compelled to conform to a pre-planned and visualized, standardized product which somebody else has constructed, thinking that that is how everybody should be. So that is one of the most important things. And that can be perhaps summed up in terms of the three principles of teaching which Sri Aurobindo has given. The first one is that nothing can be taught. Nothing can be taught can appear very a surprising, astonishing statement. If nothing can be taught, then all schools and colleges and teachers become redundant. What are they there for? What it means is that unless the student is willing to learn, the teacher cannot teach. It's the student who has to learn. So you cannot teach anything. It is the student who actually makes an effort to learn, and the student makes an effort to learn if the student is interested, if the student finds that learning is fun. And that takes us to the second principle, that is the mind should be consulted in its growth. Whose mind? The student's mind, not the teacher's mind. The student's mind should be consulted in the growth of the child's mind. So the child's mind has to grow, and for that the child's mind should be consulted. So if we are able to find what a particular child is made for, then you will be able to give more of what the child actually truly wants to learn and make it interesting. The child will find it fun. And what the child will find interesting and find fun is what the child already has some idea about, and then he can add on it. And that takes us to the third principle, from the near to the far. That is, move from what is familiar to the unfamiliar, from the simple to the complex. So that is the way knowledge should proceed. So these three principles give us a good clue to how we can make learning fun as well as useful. And all this, Sri Aurobindo says, is to bring out the best in the child. But that is not enough. Bring out the best in the child so that it is put to a noble use. That's also a part of education, because bringing out the best, and then how will this be used for a noble purpose? And that is where the psychic being comes in. So psychic education forms the very pivot of education, around which the education of the body and the mind revolve. Which means that the child's instruments, that is the body and the mind, should develop as a result of education, but all the time the child is becoming more and more aware of that inner guide, that inner source of ultimate wisdom, and therefore the child also learns that it is in its own interest to make this instrument work in light of that inner guide, the psychic being. So that in a way sort of is the essence of education, if one were to put it as briefly as is possible in the answer to a question. And that obviously obviates the need for marks and grades and certificates, and even if they become an absolute necessity in some situations, one will not judge a child in terms of those. You are judging only a certain aspect of what the child has learned. You will try to, of course, widen the net of what you are trying to examine also. You know, in educational jargon we call it the validity of a test. Validity of a test means testing what is really worth testing, what you really want to test. And that is something which we really need to pay attention to, because when it comes to the validity of tests, very often we are testing basically memory by asking for factual recall, and that is something that should not be done. And in that process, even when it comes to the mental aspects of education, we are not able to develop in the child faculties of learning which are higher than factual recall or memory. And what are those higher faculties? Higher faculties are, firstly, understanding what one knows, being able to apply what one knows, but it goes beyond that. The higher faculties of the learning, or the higher faculties of the intellect, also include abilities to summarize, elaborate, narrate, contextualize, and even beyond that, originality, creativity, and critical thinking and logical thinking. Now these are things that do not develop sufficiently. And why are we sacrificing a lot of this in relation to just factual recall and development of memory? Because one reason is that is the way we have been doing for generations, one. Secondly, to frame questions in exams which test factual recall are much easier to frame than questions which test higher faculties of learning. And thirdly, it's only in questions on factual recall that you can have very high reliability. In education, reliability corresponds to the fact that if you examine a child repeatedly, or if you examine the answers of a child repeatedly, every examiner will give exactly the same number of marks. So that is called reliability. And you can see reliability is 100% in a multiple choice question. So the easiest questions to frame are multiple choice questions which test factual recall, because reliability is 100%. But in that process, very often we sacrifice validity, which means, are we really examining what the child should be examined on? Are we asking something which is worth asking for? That gets sacrificed. So it's not necessarily that any type of evaluation is bad. What is important is, again, what we are evaluating and how we are evaluating. So the what and the how is more important than just doing it.
The next question is, what should be the position during sleep, and after how much time one should sleep after food in the night?
After sleep, as a rule of the thumb, about 2 hours after the last meal. And the position, most people sleep on the side, and that is okay. And if it is not too long after a meal, on the left side is considered better than on the right, because the stomach is on the left side, so that will be in the dependent position. The stomach will be in the dependent position. So that will be more comfortable and perhaps better than sleeping on the right side. But then there are people who are back sleepers, and that is also okay. What is perhaps not so okay is sleeping on the tummy. So either on the back or on the side, and especially if it is soon after a meal, then to start with on the left side. But then without being even conscious of it, everybody turns the side during the night a few times. So nobody sleeps on the same side throughout the night continuously for 7 to 8 hours. But to start with, left side is probably better than the right. And just as important as the position of sleeping is also the mattress and the pillow. The mattress should be firm, preferably with a quilted surface, not a very smooth surface, neither too soft nor too hard, and with a quilted surface, a firm mattress. And that can be cotton or coir or any of these, but certainly not all foam. Even high density foam is generally not firm enough. It does yield quite a bit. So on the whole, coir and cotton or sandwiched mattresses which have a thin layer of foam and another layer of coir and things like that, with a quilted surface, those are better. How about the pillow? The pillow, if one is a back sleeper, then it should be a thin pillow. So that this hollow, at the neck, that just gets filled up. It's supported. And to make it further sure, while lying down on the back, one can pull the ears of the pillow forwards so that this hollow is properly filled up. So that is for the back sleeper. How about the side sleeper? The side sleeper should have a pillow which is rather thick, not too thin. Why? Because then the hollow to be filled up is this much, which is much bigger. Otherwise the neck will bend like this. So for the head to remain in this position as it is, as a person is sitting, instead of becoming like this hollow has to be filled up. But at the same time, it can't be a very hard thing, which means that it should be such that it fills up this hollow and yet doesn't feel hard. And one of the ways one can do it is by having something firm underneath a soft pillow. So that firm thing will not yield, whereas this what you have on the softer thing which you have over it, soft and pretty thick, but over it, that will make the whole thing conform to the curves here. And one practical way I have found, of achieving that end is just fold a blanket and put the blanket inside a pillow cover, and then over that keep the pillow. Then you just get just the right height with an ordinarily available pillow, and the top you have the pillow which is quite soft, and underneath you have a folded blanket which is firm and provides that 3 inches or so of height.
Next is, should ghee be eaten on a regular basis?
Yes, by and large, yes, because uh, not only Ayurvedic wisdom, but also the latest wisdom in modern science is that our fatty acid intake should be balanced, which means about one third of the fatty acids should be saturated, one third monounsaturated, and one third polyunsaturated. And that means that some amount of saturated and monounsaturated fat is not only acceptable but also desirable. And ghee is essentially a mixture of these two. About two-thirds is saturated and one-third is monounsaturated. That is what ghee is. And therefore, if we combine that with a relatively unsaturated fat like soybean oil and mustard oil, it gives us a good combination. Of course, mustard oil and soybean oil are not as unsaturated as some of the other oils like corn oil and rice bran oil and so on. They are even more unsaturated. But therefore these oils, even without ghee, are fairly okay. But with ghee in moderation, it becomes even better. So it should be consumed, and how it is consumed, again, it depends. It can be used as a cooking medium. It can be had as such, or some people who have constipation, they find it useful to take half a spoon of ghee in hot milk as a bedtime drink in the evening. So these are different ways in which ghee can be consumed.
Sir, this is Sonika again. Sir, how would you rate sesame oil with respect to mustard oil?
Which oil?
Sesame oil.
Til ka tel.
Tail oil, huh? Sesame.
हाँ जी.
Sesame oil is one of the tail oil is highly unsaturated and of the N6 variety, and therefore there's no comparison. Comparison can be between tail oil and corn oil and rice bran oil. They are all oils with almost exclusively N6 type of polyunsaturated fatty acids, all unsaturated and of the N6 variety. And those are the oils which had been popularized by the medical profession itself for a few decades, starting with about the 1960s till about the 1990s. And that somehow refuses to go away. That conditioning refuses to go away. These exclusive and large amounts of these oils which were consumed at that time, in those 30 years or so, did not do us any harm because of the resilience of the body. It was not because the oils were good. And the subtle damage that they were doing has now become pretty clear, and therefore these are not the best oils to take. But since a lot of industry also built up around these oils, that also keeps these oils alive. And in keeping with the recent knowledge, what they have started doing is they say that it is not just this oil, it is a blend. So they add a bit of soybean oil or some other oils to make it a blend. But then I have studied quite a few of these blends, and I find that on the whole, taking the soybean oil or mustard oil itself is much better than any of these blends, because the blends only dilute what is good with something which is not so good.
Another question is related to spirituality and ritualism. That could you elaborate on the difference between spirituality and ritualism? How to increase spirituality in daily life? Even yoga asanas can become a ritual.
This question has two aspects. Let me take the second one first. Not only yoga asanas can become a ritual, chanting a mantra can become a ritual, a prayer can become a ritual. And therefore it's an important question. We have to make sure that it does not become a mechanical repetition of an activity which not only makes it a ritual, but also the mother has said a very penetrative, incisive statement she has made. very beautiful insight. If anything becomes too repetitive, sincerity generally goes down. Just reflect over it and you'll see it does happen. You can't help it. It becomes more and more mechanical and the sincerity goes down. You don't think of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, one way to do it would be to be conscious of it, that this can happen and therefore not let it happen. Second would be perhaps to introduce some variety into it. Don't do exactly the same thing for years together. Try and bring some fresh air into it, some fresh air of novelty into it, and that will probably help in renewing the sincerity. So that is the second question. Now, how about the first question? This comparison cannot be between spirituality and ritualism. Comparison can be between spirituality and religion. Ritualism has no place, or rituals have no place in spirituality. Let me put it that way. So that in a way answers your question. But I feel like elaborating a bit on it by comparing spirituality with religion. Religion has four aspects. One is an underlying spiritual philosophy. And when it comes to that, there is very little difference between individual religions. And whatever differences are there can be reconciled. The second aspect of a religion is an ethical code. Again, the differences between different religions in terms of what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, what is good and what is bad are relatively small, and the differences are not impossible to reconcile. The third aspect of the religion is the myths and legends associated with the religion. These keep growing with time to some extent, and they lend an identity to the religion. They can also serve as inspiring tales, and that can be useful for everybody irrespective of the religion. The fourth aspect of a religion are its rituals and ceremonies. It is here that there can be considerable differences. They also give an identity to the religion, and they are the most visible part of the religion. And unfortunately, the least necessary but get the maximum importance. So that is where religions fit in. So out of these four aspects, you would see that spirituality is only the first one. The other three are not there in spirituality. You would say that does spirituality have no ethical code? Yes, spirituality, strictly speaking, has no ethical code, because the sense of right and wrong comes from inside you, within you, from the inner guide, the psychic being, the dynamic aspect of the soul. So in that sense, there's no written ethical code in spirituality, a set of do's and don'ts which should or should not be done. However, having said that, taking support from a written ethical code does help even on the spiritual path for a very long distance, because this freedom to use only the inner guide, Sarva Dharman Paritejya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, comes only in the 18th chapter of the Gita. That is, you can take refuge in the guidance coming from the divine within you, your own Krishna. Now that freedom comes only in the 18th chapter. Till at least the 16th chapter, even the Gita talks about following the Shastra. And what is Shastra? Shastra is what is given in the books as an ethical code. So every religion does have an ethical code, and till one feels the freedom that one is entitled to, the type of freedom that one has, on depending entirely on the inner guide. There is a difference between depending on the inner guide and depending entirely on the inner guide, because there can be situations in which anybody will depend on that inner guide and do the right thing even if it is against the ethical code. That is okay. But to depend entirely on that inner guide till a person is confident, it is better to turn to a Shastra, a written code, and if one is still in doubt, turn to a person who you think is wiser than you in these aspects, and try to ask that person what I should do. So, but strictly speaking, in spirituality at the highest level, there is no ethical code, no myths and legends, and no rituals and ceremonies, which are all there in religions. Okay.
Next question. As we age, capacity to absorb certain vitamins and minerals becomes less. Is it good to take supplements?
Yes, that's a good insurance policy. The absorption does go down of all these nutrients, and therefore, in spite of what eating food which may be okay in young age, one may become deficient in some of these nutrients, and therefore, as an insurance policy, a supplement is okay. But then one important thing is we should not take mega doses of anything, because sometimes these supplements provide doses which are much higher than is necessary. That is not only a waste, it could also be harmful, because just because something is good, more of it is not necessarily better.
Next question is, which is better, cotton pillow or fiber pillow?
Well, the important thing is the consistency, not so much what it is full of. The consistency should be by and large pretty soft, because we want it to conform it to the pillows, to the curves of the neck. The hollow is much less than when we are sleeping on the back, and it becomes bigger when we sleep on the side, but basically we want it to conform it to that curve and fill up the hollow. So that can happen only if it is pretty soft. But at the same time, as I said, when you're sleeping on the side, a firm base which raises the height is also necessary.
In relation to the cooking oils we were talking about, what about coconut oil for cooking, especially if one lives in Pondicherry or Chennai?
Whether
Coconut oil for cooking.
Yes, coconut oil has gone through sort of in the last few decades, changes in ideas about coconut oil have been there. Initially, there was a time when it was considered undesirable because coconut oil is a saturated oil, and saturated oil raises blood cholesterol, and therefore coconut oil is no good. But then it was found that the type of saturated fat in coconut oil is quite different from the saturated fat which had been studied in these experiments. Coconut oil is basically medium chain triglycerides, whereas what had been studied were long chain triglycerides, saturated fat. So the difference. Then it was also found that people in Kerala particularly who eat almost exclusively coconut oil were not getting too much of heart disease. So then it was found that coconut oil is okay, especially in those who have been accustomed to it for generations. So therefore, if you are accustomed to coconut oil for generations, coconut oil is quite acceptable now. Today is Friday, and normally we do not have a session on Saturdays. But tomorrow we do have a session, same time, and it is because of the 12th of February being the Ashram Foundation Day. That was the day on which Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch was established in the year 1956. But apart from that, this year we also have more to celebrate, and those, of course, celebrations will be in the evening time at 4 o'clock. But the two other things we are celebrating are that Tara Didi, who looks after the ashram, who is the chairperson of the ashram, she has been Padma Shri has been conferred upon her just a few days ago. And the third thing that we are celebrating tomorrow evening is the tableau which you saw on the Republic Day in the parade is being handed over formally to the ashram to become a permanent part of the ashram. Tomorrow evening, it's being handed over to us by the Ministry of Culture. But anyway, that apart, when it comes to our usual session at 8:30, we will meet, and we'll have a variety of things for you, which will not only make you more familiar with the ashram, but also can be considered a part of the studies in yoga that we have been doing. So it will be both educative and entertaining. Let me put it that way. So see you tomorrow again, and hope to have an enriching session.
Thank you, everyone. We end with the music today.